are part of Voiz Reviews, which is a startup company based in LA. And we're here to give you an insight into how your shopping choices will impact just the world around you in general. So, Elisa, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so hi, my name's Elisa. I'm in my last year at my last semester at Cornell University, which is in Ithaca, and I'm from New York City, which is my hometown.
Hi everyone, I'm Alekhya. I'm pursuing my master's in Montreal at McGill University, which is in Canada, and I'm from Hyderabad in India.
Hi everyone, my name is Sanskriti. I'm studying in Georgetown University here in Qatar. I've been involved with MUN and MUN Impact since it started, and I'm really happy to be here again and just give you an insight into what we do. So just to tell you an overview of what we're going to be talking to you about today. So first we'll be introducing what SDG 12 is. Then we'll be telling you more about Voiz, the company, and how and what we do. And the main chunk of this presentation will be breaking down the review process and making you understand how you can actually approach sustainability. And the last thing we're going to tell you is how you and us and just anyone around you can contribute towards SDG 12 because it is a less talked about SDG in general. So just to give you an overview, SDG 12 is it's not as favorable when you think about projects and things like that. But the one thing that I want to point out to you is that SDG 12 is one of the most synergetic SDG out there. Responsible consumption and production can impact any number of SDGs. It can impact affordable and clean energy, clean water and sanitation, quality education, life on land, any host of things. It can just, a lot of things can improve if we focus on our consumption and the way we produce things. There's a misconception that a lot of things involved in SDG 12 is regarding waste management or the climate, but I think that there is a lot more to it and it has a lot more impacts than you might think. So this is just what I got off the website, and it talks about how SDG 12 just behaves in general. So we currently live in a very unsustainable world. The carbon emissions are through the roof. We are obviously trying to do things, but they're not working. With COVID, there have been a lot of disastrous developments within the unsustainability and how we consume things, given things like Amazon and just transport in general. So at the bottom, you see there's harvesting, transport, storage, and processing, all of which fall under this. And just to go over the targets, by 2030,
I'm sorry to interrupt, Sanskriti. Could you just speak up, please? Because some of the audience can't hear you very well.
Oh, okay. So just to go over the targets, there are a number of them, but these are the ones that I picked that I think are pretty holistic in terms of the approach towards SDG 12. So one of them says that by 2030, we should have the global capita of food waste at the retail and consumer levels and reduce food loss along production and chain supplies. So these really show you the main and the most pressing issues that we have regarding SDG 12. And I think that these correlate very strongly with a lot of the other things that we're going to talk about today.
Hi, so I'll be introducing Voiz Reviews and who we are as an organization and what our mission is. Next slide. Yeah, so Voiz is a collective of college-age Gen Zs, and what we're really trying to do is make sustainability more accessible to the everyday consumer. So we're trained to be sustainability analysts and to be able to review everything from supply chain to packaging material to company ethos. And when we write our reviews of individual products and companies, what we're really doing is demanding transparency, spotlighting progress, and calling out greenwashing when we see it. Next slide, please. So here's an example of a Voiz review of the iPhone 11. And here you can see that the framework that we review under, which is the three questions: what is it made of, how is it made, and who makes it? And so we kind of work like a Michelin star system. But instead of stars, we use planets. So we rate out of 3 planets, and like a Michelin star, if you have 1 planet, that means you're taking some steps towards sustainability. It's not like nothing at all, but if you have 0 planets or even negative planets, that means the product or the company is doing harm in terms of sustainability. And so for this iPhone, you can see that it has a -1 overall rating, which means that it is doing some harm to the planet. And in terms of our review itself, I've taken out some excerpts from the different sections of the review. So for the who makes it portion, the code talks about hours worked of overtime for the iPhone assembly workers. iPhone assembly workers work 100 hours of overtime during a month during peak season, whereas Chinese law says that workers are not allowed to work more than 36 hours of overtime in a month. And then in the overall section, the quote says, Apple's sustainability initiatives are like fixing a leaky faucet in a burning building. Apple pioneered the phenomenon of constantly buying new technology, and that is the core problem. So from these 2 excerpts, you can see that in our reviews, we offer data and we do a lot of research about an individual product or company, but at the same time, from the overall section, you can see that we add our own voice to it. So we all have our individual values. We're all given the same tools to evaluate products, which is the Voiz training program, which trained us to be sustainability analysts. But at the same time, we have our own flavor of what we care about when it comes to sustainability. And you can really see that through, different reviews of the same product, or, just all of our reviews in general. Next slide.
So now we'll move on to the third portion, which is the review process, and we'll show you how we delve into it and how we look into a very holistic research process.
So I'll be talking about the first section, which is what is it made of? So what goes into your products? Next slide, please. So one of the biggest questions is, how often does anybody check or go through the list of ingredients that goes into their products before buying something? I mean, how much time do you usually spend when you actually buy a product? Next slide, please. So actually, until I started working with Voiz, I don't think I spent a lot of time looking at the ingredients that go into my product. And this has really helped me understand how much greenwashing there is and what companies do to just claim that they're sustainable, but they're not. Sanskriti, can you please open this link? So this is a very common product that I'm sure everyone's seen, which is Johnson & Johnson's baby shampoo. Could you scroll down even further? Yeah, right there, a little above. Yeah, so they have a color-coded ingredient glossary, which helps people understand what ingredient there is and what its function is. But if you see this, they have so many colors, and can you scroll down? And like so many chemicals that are going into a baby shampoo. And I mean, as a layman, it's hard to understand. And the list of these ingredients can be super overwhelming. At least to me, it is. And unless you're a chemist or have a strong background in chemistry, I don't think it's very easy to understand what any of this ingredient does. Okay, so yeah, so it's hard to evaluate sustainability, especially when it comes to what goes into your product when there's such a long, overwhelming list of ingredients. So today I'll be breaking it down into 5 simple steps. The first one is materiality. So materiality basically constitutes the raw materials or ingredients that go into the product and packaging that comes with the product. So when it comes to raw materials or ingredients, like we just saw for the shampoo, the list can be super overwhelming. So when you have a lot of chemicals, I think it's best to not get into the whole chemical trap. And it's easier to categorize your ingredients based on what has more impact on humans and what has more impacts on the environment. And what is non-toxic and what is organic and what is synthetic. I mean, this, I'm sure all of us can sort of categorize into what's toxic to the environment and what's not by a simple Google search. And I think packaging is also a very important aspect of materiality, because whenever I order off things Amazon, the product might be really tiny, but it comes in with a lot of cardboard packages and a lot of bubble wraps and plastic wrappers. So I think this is another thing we should look into before we buy a product, because the lesser, the better, right? Next slide, please. So the next step would be design choices, and this is something that should come from the company's end. Next slide. So most products today or in the past were designed keeping in mind a cradle to grave design method, which is once you use a product, when it comes to the end of its life, you just throw it in a landfill, which is what fast fashion is today, right? I mean, we have so many clothes piling up in the landfills, but there's an interesting fact here, which says that one pair of jeans you buy actually uses up the amount of water that an individual would drink in 5 to 6 years. That's a lot. And I think fast fashion and a lot of fashion companies these days uh, use the cradle to grave method while designing their products, which I think is super wrong. But a lot of companies nowadays are also adopting the cradle to cradle, and I think most companies should switch to the cradle to cradle design choice, which is when a product is at the end stage of its life cycle, it can be upcycled or repurposed into making another product or used for something else. So these are some of the 5 most important R's. So the first one and the most important one is ideally refuse. So you refuse to buy a new product until and unless absolutely necessary. The second one is re-commerce, which is thrifting to a certain extent. Used products can be sold and people can buy used products. The third one is reuse. The fourth one is repurpose. That is, you can sort of repurpose a product at the end of its life cycle to make it something else. And the last one is recycle. Recycle is the last one because it is a very energy intensive process. The next slide, please. So these are some companies that are adopting the cradle to cradle design method. The first one is Allbirds. So Allbirds is a very famous footwear company, and they make a lot of their shoes with recycled plastic bottles. It's interesting to note that they even make their shoelaces with recycled plastic bottles. Patagonia is an American company that makes outdoor clothing, and 70% of their clothes are made out of recycled plastic bottles or recycled products. This is another small company called Still Good, which is based out of Montreal, and we are really excited to review this for our Voiz reviews soon. So they make cookies and flour out of spent grain and used fruit and vegetable pulps. The next slide, please. So the third most important factor while evaluating what goes into your product are certifications. Next slide. So some of these, the picture here shows some of the important certifications, which will probably help you understand if what you're buying is actually safe and environmentally sustainable. Some of them are USDA organic, non-GMO, certified gluten-free, certified vegan, and things like that. So this is something you want to look out for if you're looking at what goes into your product. Next slide, please. So the fourth and one of the most important aspects when it comes to evaluating sustainability, in my opinion, is trade-offs. Next slide, please. Oh no, the one before this. Oh. So what does a trade-off typically look like? So a trade-off can be making a decision between good versus bad, and that's clearly, I mean, anybody would choose the good option. But sometimes you might have to make decisions between good versus good too. For example, we all know that recycled fleece is, I mean, it sounds very interesting, right? Because you're using wool that's already been used and you're recycling it. But a lesser known fact is that it releases microplastics. And when you consider normal conventional wool production, it's pretty water intensive. So here you're sort of making a choice between what you'd prefer. Like, would you prefer releasing microplastics to the environment or using more water? So trade-offs are basically judgments that individuals usually make based on their personal value systems and other things like budget constraints and things like that. Next slide, please. So this is a pretty interesting example of a comparison between the different kinds of milk available in the market today. So I'm sure it's pretty clear from this graph that dairy milk is definitely not a good choice because the emissions, land use, and water use are way higher than for the other milk options. But when it comes to plant-based milks, oat milk and almond milk are usually very commonly preferred among people. So when it comes to these two milks, we can see that oat milk has higher emissions than almond milk, whereas almond milk uses a lot more water than oat milk. So in a situation like this, it's important we make a trade-off between the emissions versus water use. So since oat milk does not release, the emissions released by oat milk are not by a very high margin as compared to almond milk, but almond milk uses a lot more water than oat milk. So I think oat milk would be a wiser choice in this situation, given the conditions. Next slide, please. So the last one is transparency and impact. I think it's important to understand that not all companies are completely sustainable, and no company today is fully sustainable. Everybody is trying their best. But I think one important fact to note is that are they trying to greenwash, or are they trying to help you make a better choice? Are they being completely open with their policies? Are they being completely transparent about their supply chain, about the ingredients used, and things like that? So yeah, that's about what a product is made of.
Okay, so now I'll talk about how it's made, which sort of deviates from what Alekhya just talked about. And the big question here is, how does a firm's own production process impact sustainability? And sustainability just doesn't have to mean how it impacts the environment, how it impacts the air quality and things like that. It can be a lot more than that. So the three bits that I've breaking this up into is production impact, packaging, and product circularity. So first, production impact. So what is involved in production? Firstly, you can think about water usage, and this can mean any type of factory use, cooling, heating, all these use water. In terms of agricultural goods, any sort of clothing that you have uses water, an immense amount of water, because all the clothes come from cotton. Any agricultural based goods, any dairy based goods, they all have water usage. It can even be used in purifying. So even if you have any chemical based products, they use water to clean, to just break things down. So that is a very, very big and sustainable practice within production. The second thing that we can think about is energy. So in terms of heating, lighting, building, maintenance, transport, in terms of even gathering raw materials. So if you have agriculture, you have, what are those called? The ones that like rake the land. So in terms of getting the topsoil, anything like that also uses energy. Chemicals, clothing especially uses a lot of dyes. A lot of painting is involved. There are a lot of reactions from these chemicals that are considered to be waste, how that waste is managed. In terms of labor, this is a very, very big one. Labor safety, labor pay, labor productivity, and especially exploitation. These are some of the very big unsustainable practices within the world that we see today. And these are some things that are contributing towards what we are trying to tackle given the SDGs in the 2030 agenda. So just type in the chat what you think all these companies have in common. UCB, Walmart, Zara, Mango, Forever 21. What do all these companies have in common? Okay, I can't really see the chat box. Oh, someone said fast fashion. Yes, but one of the biggest things that these companies contributed to is this. This is a building in Bangladesh. It's a clothing factory. It's called Rana Plaza, and I think a lot of you may have studied this in middle school. This was a very big case study that I went through in my geography and history class. This is what the atrocities of fast fashion, of fast industries looks like. This is the catastrophe that people face. So Rana Plaza is in Bangladesh. It collapsed in 2013 because of quote unquote structural failure. That is not what the cause was. This was an illegally built 8-story factory. And the reason why it's illegally built is because it had a capacity of only 5 stories. But because of fast fashion, because of the demand for the clothing, and because of the accessibility of cheap labor, this building was, there were 3 stories that were illegally added to this building to accommodate for more orders, for more people, for more just demand overall. So there was a structural failure because there were 3 additional stories. It just could not handle the weight. There were over 3,000 people in that building on any given day because that is the number of people that work there. It was overcrowded. It was almost like what you would consider a sweatshop, but just worse. I don't know if you can see within these pictures, but the windows are all barred so that people will not be able to escape. And that is also one of the reasons why people died, because they were not able to jump out the windows while the building was falling. So this is just, it's insane, honestly. This is what labor safety regulations do. They try to avoid all these things, which honestly, these should be the very basic foundation of what a company should be looking out for. So what was the response to this? There was a compensation given to victims, but it was quote unquote compensation. Some of the companies that were giving orders to Rana Plaza said that we will give you compensation only if you're able to provide DNA evidence for your relative or for your loved one's death during the collapse. But given the situation, given their ability or inability to gather all these information, a lot of people were not able to provide this DNA information and were not given their compensation. And keep in mind, these are people who are living on less than $1 a day. There are women in this factory who are working over 18 hours a day just to get money. So it's extremely difficult for people in these situations to be able to provide DNA evidence, let alone just show that someone they love passed away in this collapse. So just to link it back to the SDGs, the 3 that I feel like fit the most here is SDG 8, 9, and 12. Decent work, economic growth, industry, innovation, infrastructure, and responsible consumption and production. And SDG 12 relates very strongly to us because we also play a part in this collapse. We are the reason why there is such a strong demand. So if we can control that, maybe things like this will not happen. So the second thing I want to talk about is packaging. And packaging is a very big issue. It also is a very, very, very big contributor towards carbon emissions. So Coca-Cola is a company that just whew, all the way up. So 5.56 metric tons of greenhouse emissions were released in 2019 from Coca-Cola alone. And this is a trend that has just been rising throughout the last decade. There were 3 million metric tons of plastic packaging that was wasted. So this is waste from transportation, this is waste from packaging, this is waste from production. So all of these things obviously contribute towards this. And out of the 3 million, I think 2.5 million metric tons were from 6 countries alone. India, Brazil, Philippines, and a couple others. So from 6 countries alone, you have 2.5 metric tons of waste. That is unbelievable because even in order to manage the waste, it takes a lot of manpower, it takes a lot of energy. So given the weak infrastructure within these places, these developing countries, to be able to manage these resources, it's unsustainable, because the amount of waste coming in versus the amount that's going out is not equal, it's not balanced. So do you think Coca-Cola is sustainable? My answer would be no. But then Coca-Cola released this. They had a sustainability goal. They set a target in 2013 to reduce their emissions by 25% in 2020. According to their data, in 2019, they had cut their carbon footprint by 24%. This shows that they really are moving towards their goal. But again, I have not done research on this, so I can't really say. But I personally don't believe that this data is very trustworthy. I personally feel like there is some form of brainwashing that's going on in this, because it's very, very hard to cut your production by this much, especially when your production is growing. You are producing so much more. So there is discrepancy between what they're saying and what is happening. And this is what Voiz tries to recognize. And the last thing that I want to talk about is product circularity. So like Alekhya mentioned, one t-shirt uses 2,700 liters of water. There are 24% of global web pesticides are used in cotton production alone. 90% of leather is tanned with chemicals like chromium. And clothes are covered in formaldehyde to prevent wrinkling. And formaldehyde, just letting you know, is a chemical compound that is found within dead bodies in order to preserve them. So this is what medical students use on their cadavers when they want to preserve the body. Do you really want that in your clothes? I think that just the chemical use within all these is very harmful, not only to the environment, but also to us. We are being exposed to these things for, in my opinion, no reason. So companies like Forever 21, Zara, and H&M, these are fast fashion industries that are using all these methods that are unsustainable to us, to the environment, to the atmosphere. And this is a very growing problem. So in terms of fast fashion, if you look at this graph, the green line here shows clothing utilization. It is the number of times that you wear or rewear your clothes. In the last 2 decades, this number has been going down. It has been reducing quite marginally. And the purple line is clothing sales. So your clothing sales are actually going up by a larger factor than the reduction within your clothing utilization. So it just goes to show that we are using so many more clothes and we are wearing them less and less. So this goes to the point that Alekhya was making about cradle to cradle versus cradle to grave. These choices are not just what production industries should be doing. These are also decisions that we need to take as people, as consumers, because we also have to understand that we are contributing to this a lot more. So that is a little bit about how it's made.
Okay, thank you, Sanskriti and Alekhya. Yeah, that's really great. Yeah, so the last question that we really ask ourselves when we review is who makes it? Next slide. So like the other sections, there's a big question here for who makes it in particular, and that is based on your values, do you support what the company stands for and what it is doing? And I think this question applies to the review process in general, and it applies to whatever product or company you're supporting with your dollar. So that's a question that I think we should all keep in mind going forward in this section. Right, so I've broken down this section into 5 different parts to really think about who makes it, because it can seem kind of daunting. Who makes it includes everything from the producer to the company executives to the company employees to the, possibly the laborers who make the products. So the first section that I want to talk about is certifications. Next. So certifications are probably the easiest way for a person to assess a company or a product, but the thing that most people don't know is that it's usually not all encompassing, and it can even be misleading or greenwashing. So for example, a lot of companies these days see sustainability as a marketing ploy. And so they think if a consumer sees our product and thinks that it's environmentally friendly or it's sustainable, then they're more likely to buy it. And so like companies definitely know this, and that's why there are so many quote unquote eco labels out there. And there's even a website that is linked here. It's called ecolabelindex.com. And from there you can see that there are more than 490 eco labels around the world. And this website, in effect, it lets companies or organizations sift through all the eco labels, exactly what they mean. And this website even consults you on what eco label is perhaps best fitting for your company or your team. And I think that just goes to show that yes, certifications can communicate some information, but a lot of the times it's not completely transparent, or a lot of the times the consumer doesn't even know what it means. They just see a green logo and they're like, okay, cool, it's environmentally friendly or sustainable. And the thing is, that's not always the case. Next slide, please. So the second thing I wanted to talk about is company policies. Next slide. So what company policies includes is really how the company treats their employees and what rights their employees have. So this could be pay and labor equity. So a question you would ask is, how much is the CEO making compared to the average employee salary? Cough, Amazon, Jeff Bezos. We all know that he is, I think, the richest person in the world right now. But the thing is, we also know that Amazon Amazon supply warehouse workers are making close to minimum wage, and they work in terrible conditions. And so this is an example of labor inequity in a company. Another thing that we can think about is healthcare and other benefits. Are all employees being given healthcare? Are they being taken care of, basically? What is their maternal paternal leave policy, so that parents and a diverse group of employees can work there but also have equal treatment? And last but not least, gender and racial equality. What does this company do to support its BIPOC, female, LGBTQ, disabled employees? Is any employee that works there treated well and equally? Does the company have diversity training? What is the company, doing about BLM, or like what? Basically, how does the company tackle these types of societal and institutional issues? So one of the companies that are really doing well in terms of this company policies is Ben & Jerry's. And we actually had the opportunity to talk to the Ben & Jerry's director of PR just a few weeks ago for our speaker series. And one of the things that was really interesting that he told us was that Ben & Jerry's was actually founded with a pay cap, a 5-to-1 pay cap. And that means that no employee can make more than 5 times what the lowest paid employee makes. So back when it was founded, the CEO could not make more than $83,000. Somewhere in that ballpark. And that is pretty much unheard of today. And that pay cap has changed a bit since then. And there's a lot of controversy around pay caps. But just knowing this about Ben & Jerry's shows us that there's a level of consciousness in that company about pay and labor equity, and that they're ahead of the curve in general. Okay, next slide, please. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is community impact. Yes, next slide. And what this means is basically thinking about how does this company, whether it's big or small, affect the community around it, and the people directly around it. So for Amazon, for example, I think about how Amazon wanted to build a new headquarters in New York City in Brooklyn, I think like a few years ago. And there was a lot of controversy and backlash from the local community, even though it is New York and it's a little, it's already gentrified as it is. What the locals were afraid of was that having an Amazon headquarters there would not only jack up rent prices even more in that area, but also keep a lot of local jobs out of the market, if that makes sense. So how could smaller companies compete with Amazon when Amazon is right in Brooklyn? And another question to ask is, how does the company affect the environment around it? So H&M, for example, has a conscious collection. And in that collection, they're trying to give the narrative that, H&M is becoming more environmentally friendly. We do think about these things. We're not just fast fashion, we can also be sustainable. But when you think about this conscious collection, which is, I don't know, like less than 5% of what they make versus like the 95% of the rest of the clothing they make, which is fast fashion and which does use harmful dyes and toxic chemicals that get released from their factories into bodies of water in usually poorer areas that are already suffering from, like poverty and other inequities. It makes you think this is not sustainable at all, and this is really greenwashing. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about was company culture and values. Next slide. And so when we think about this, it's really about what is the company's mission? What do they use to drive their company forward? What was their company founded on? And why are they even doing the things that they do? Like, why did they create their company? And the second part of that is authenticity. So a lot of companies will say that they, champion sustainability, but is that really the truth, or is that just a marketing ploy? And also, even if a company does say that they, really care about, women's issues and they are, they support feminist policies, do their actions actually align with their values? So one of the companies that I think about in terms of company culture and values is Uber, because Uber has for a long time given this narrative of, we really care about women. We want women to feel safe in our cars. We support women being able to drive in, different countries. And that is not necessarily reflected in their actions because, a few years ago, Uber had a lot of sexual harassment and sexual assaults lawsuits filed against them because there was a terrible company culture of basically harassment on female employees by more executive male employees. And those employees who filed sexual harassment reports, some were actually fired after that. And because of this, you really think to yourself, does Uber really care about its women in general? It doesn't even care about its female employees, it seems, to the point that those employees don't feel safe enough reporting it to the company. They have to file a lawsuit in order to get the company to, take any action on this. Next slide, please. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about, which is probably one of the most salient with me, is transparency. So what this means is, yes, no company is perfect. Like nothing is perfect. Everything that we buy, that we consume has an impact. And the thing is, it's okay to be imperfect. But does the company acknowledge that they are? So two companies on opposite ends of the spectrum are, and this could be controversial, are Oatly and Everlane. So Oatly is a company that I think has really normalized and introduced the consumption of oat milk to the general population. And they have a really clear mission when it comes to decreasing the environmental impact of the milk that we drink. And they're very transparent in their sustainability reports about exactly what sustainability initiatives they're creating, but also which UN SDG does this specific initiative contribute to. But then they also say, what do we not do well? What do we not do perfectly? And that's really great because like I said before, no company is perfect. But if a company is willing to say what they're not doing well and then give a concrete goal, for example, to be carbon neutral, and a concrete date to do that by, for example, 2025, it shows that they're holding themselves accountable to what they're not doing well and what they want to do better. As opposed to a company that just says they're transparent or that they're sustainable, but doesn't really give you all the information that you would want to know as a consumer. So on the flip end of that, of Oatly, is Everlane. And if you are familiar with Everlane, they're kind of like a minimal clothing company that was founded on the idea of radical transparency. And like when I first heard this, I thought, wow, this is really great. They're more affordable than most like non-fast fashion brands. And I really love the idea of radical transparency. They speak out on a lot of social justice issues. They have information on each factory that they source from, or each factory that they get their clothing items made in. But like last year, Everlane had a huge issue with union busting. And what happened there was basically a lot of employees wanted to create a union so that they can advocate for their rights, because there were a lot of like wrongdoings and like lack of like good management when it came to the retail store workers, and they wanted to unionize so that they can advocate for themselves. So but the thing is, Everlane also fired many of those workers after they tried to unionize, and a lot of people noticed, and they said, like, this is not what Everlane is supposed to be about. I thought you supported your workers. I thought you supported transparency. But the thing is, Everlane hasn't said a thing about the union busting ever since then, and that's made me personally question supporting Everlane. So that is an example of two companies with different levels of transparency. Okay.
So the last thing that we want to touch up on is contribution towards SDG 12, what Voiz is doing. So here at Voiz, we've shown you what we do. We broke down the 3 processes, and we wanted to highlight that we are directly working towards 3 targets within SDG 12. So the first one is encouraging companies, especially large and transnational companies, to adopt sustainable policies and integrate sustainability to inform in their reporting cycle. So we are calling companies out. We're saying, hey, this is what you're doing wrong. This is what you're not telling us. The second thing we're doing is promoting public procurement practices that are sustainable. We're telling the public, hey, this is unsustainable. Hey, this is what we should be doing. Hey, this is wrong. And the most important one that I feel that Voiz does is by 2030 to ensure that people everywhere have relevant information and awareness for sustainable development and lifestyle in harmony with nature. This is very important because this is the core or the crux of SDG 12. This is what it wants to achieve. But here at Voiz, we put together the reviews on a website and we make it widely available to the public. Voiz, like we mentioned before, is Gen Z. We are college students, we are high school students who are putting this together, and we are making accessible to the public to be more informed about their decisions and their consumption patterns. So just to point out a little bit about what people are doing in other parts of the world about this. So in China, directly relating to SDG 12, people are making solar cookers more accessible, because a lot of the cooking done within the rural areas is very carbon excessive. So a lot of these projects are focused on ensuring carbon neutrality. And the same thing was done in Malawi in Africa, where they decided to show farmers how to have high yield crops and have income diversity, whereby they can make money not just off crops, but through other agricultural produce in order to ensure that they are able to earn a living. So we have an activity for you. Yeah, Alekhya, do you want to take over?
Yeah, sure. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so here we have 3 chocolate bars. I'm not sure if all of you have heard of the first and second, but I think Hershey's is pretty famous. So, and this is a little bit of information about the chocolate bars. So we'd like you to vote on which chocolate bar you choose out of the 3 of them based on their sustainability mission and their values, just like based on the little information that you have here. Do we have the poll ready?
Yeah, that's the poll.
Yeah, I think the poll was sent in the chat.
Yeah, these three chocolate bars are, you know, at varying levels of like price points and things like that, and also have different claims. So just from those, yeah, from that information, just choose which one you would buy personally. Okay, next slide. Okay, so let's see. Here is an example of how Voiz like gives value to the consumer, because this is not necessarily information that you would know about the Alter Eco chocolate bar, for example. So the Alter Eco chocolate bar rated 2.5 stars out of 3 overall. It rated 3 stars for what is it made of, 2.5 stars for how's it made, and 2.5 stars for who makes it. And here's an excerpt from one of the reviews of the chocolate bar. It's really interesting that, you know, 100% of the products and ingredients are sourced directly from small scale farmers through partnerships with local co-ops. And this reviewer specifically appreciated that they added farmer profiles to personalize the experience, to get to really know who is creating the product that you're eating. And in general, they would recommend Alter Eco chocolate. Next slide, please. Okay, so, and here is a review of Taza chocolate. And I actually wrote this one myself because I've had Taza chocolate before and I really liked it. So it's a stone ground Mexican chocolate. But the thing is, I rated it, this is actually a little generous looking back at it, but I rated it 1 out of 3 planets overall, 2.5 for what is it made of, 1 for how's it made, and 0.5 for who makes it. And so, you know, from just looking at the chocolate bar, you're like, oh, cool, this is a really like artisanal, like, you know, like different chocolate bar, because you don't see stone ground Mexican chocolate usually in American markets. But I found out, you know, like they have a lot of great environmental sustainability initiatives, but the company was created by like 2 white people from Massachusetts who went to Oaxaca in Mexico, learned about this technique, and then brought it back to the US to capitalize on it. And the thing is, for me, finding out about that, I didn't feel really good because they're not giving back to the Mexican community in any way. And that's where they sourced this technique from. Alekhya, did you want? Hello, Alekhya?
Yeah, sorry. So Hershey's, I think the reviewer here was a little generous with the number of planets, but what he or she's written here is that Hershey's is definitely not a super great brand, because they're sort of involved in greenwashing to a certain extent, because they claim to be very transparent, but we still don't know what goes on. So that's about it from our end. Thank you.
Yeah, we only have 3 minutes, so if you have any questions that you would like to ask, I've also passed around a spreadsheet if you're interested in finding out more about Voiz. Voiz will be doing a collaboration with MUN Impact. We'll be offering a course on sustainability to high school students specifically. So if you're interested, please pass on your information and we'll be getting in touch with you.
We could also share the post. Oh, so alter ego one. That's a good choice, guys.
Yeah. Oh, someone says the document is not accessible. Do we have time for Q&A?
Yeah, I think there's a question in the chat box.
Yeah, we do not have time for Q&A because the session is supposed to end at 6 o'clock and we have 2 minutes left. But we thank you very much for the presentation and yeah, thank you.
I just updated the information on the spreadsheet, so you should be able to see it now.
Please follow us on Instagram at Voiz Reviews. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. We really hope you learned something, and we really hope that you apply some things into your daily life and really change your consumer patterns.
Yeah. Thank you.
If you do want to reach out with your question, we can answer.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Oh, that's the wrong. Wait.
Oh. It's actually spelled with a Z. Yeah. Great. Thank you, everyone.
You could DM us the questions on Instagram, probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We'll
We'd
get
love to
back
talk
to you.
about it.
Yeah.
Everyone's so kind. No, thank you for coming.
Okay, cool. Can we leave?
Do we leave or do we stay?
Yeah.
Yeah,
we can
so, I think Shannon's about to close the room soon. So you,
Oh my
you guys
God,
can.
hi Shannon. I didn't know you were here.
Hey, Sam.
Hi.
What a way to meet. It was a really great presentation, I have to say, though. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, so you guys are free to leave. I'll just close the room once everyone's gone.
Okay.
All right, thanks. See you.
See you. Bye-bye.